Hey everybody, it's Saturday morning again, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of Saturday Mornings with Nobody. I can't wait to talk to you about today's topic because, to be honest, I really didn't expect to be discussing this much. Now, this comes as a huge surprise to me, even though I slightly remembered this stuff as I was going through it. But, well, I'm just kind of rambling. Let me get to the point.
With the Mario Brothers and plumbing's a game. We're not like the others who get all the fame. If your sink is in trouble, you can call us on the double. We're faster than the others, you'll be hooked on the brothers.
Now, originally this episode was going to be specifically about one cartoon, and I was researching it because I remembered a cartoon from when I was a kid about a kiddo who got sucked into a video game world and became like a champion or whatever. And as I was researching, I had found it and got really excited. And then I started to watch it and read the stuff about it and found out that I had the thickest pair of rose-colored glasses on for this, because it turns out it was part of a trio of shows that were just god awful, okay? Now let me put some stuff into perspective, okay? It's the 80s, it's the late 80s. Video games have just kind of started making their blossoming entrance into common day activity, in the home, There were Ataris and stuff, and Commodores and ColecoVisions and stuff like that before this, but Nintendo Entertainment System in the 1980s was huge, okay? It was huge. There was storyline driven video games, adventures and actions and stuff. You could actually tell that was a little plumber with a mustache on his face that was jumping around stomping on turtles. Or you could see the little elf guy's hat with the sword as he was flinging it around, slicing people up. There were, active storylines, solid, invested stories and characters and stuff that kids all in that era, that whole generation were just infatuated with. I mean, it got to the point to where they were making cereals, and it was the common thing, t-shirts, video games, and little accessories, and all the little goobles and gobbles and stuff on t-shirts and lunchboxes and stuff, and it blew up. And it blew up so bad that a lot of people at a studio called DIC, I'm not going to say it out loud because every time I say Deke wrong, somebody mispronounces it and then I get into a lot of trouble. Oh god, I just said it. Okay, so the studio DIC released a couple of different cartoons that kind of tried to get on the back of this franchise and ride it while its popularity was really big. Airing late in 1989, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show is the first one of these series to kind of get the hold of the reins, basically, as they tried to carry through the popularity of video games' influence on American culture, okay? Now let me put this into perspective. This was a live-action animated variant, okay? They had two actors that played Mario and Luigi in the real world that were going through some nonsense, and they had a guest star usually trying to help them through it. And somehow that would incorporate into them dealing with something in the animated world, which was itself its own segment. So it was a two-piece series that ended with a very, very awkward theme song, Do the Mario. If we could, I wish to God we could roll that footage.
Do the Mario, swing your arms from side to side. Come on, it's time to go. Do the Mario, take one step, and then again, let's do the Mario all together now.
Yeah, and this show was, the animation was for the time, it was about as good as you can get, and the storylines were super basic. Bad thing happened, they took care of it, usually with the exact same things they used to take care of it the last time, and it just became that. It ran long enough to help another cartoon series kind of get a base launching point to start its own thing going. And that is what I'm going to talk about next, which is The Legend of Zelda. Now keep in mind, this was its own show. And the Super Mario Bros. Super Show would air short burst episodics because the half of the show was the live action and the other half was the animated, so the runtime was a little shorter. And they would use sometimes that small runtime to air these Legends of Zelda episodes. Now, released by the same studio, okay, and, the same cruddy style of animation, and, kind of lazy acting, voice acting, and same lazy concept of story where it was bad guy does something bad, good guy does pretty much around the exact same thing he did last time to save the day. And this one met with kind of like a higher resolve because the fan base for Zelda was just a little bit more bigger at the time, I guess. Super Mario was huge. Super Mario is always huge. It's always been huge. It's like Nintendo's face, okay? But The Legend of Zelda was picking up steam in its own right, and so now the fan base that was watching Super Mario Super Show had another fan base, The Legend of Zelda, and they thought, well, let's just make it its own show, and it ran for 11 in the number of episodes. And I mean, all of these shows pretty much ran between like 1 and 3 seasons. Like, they didn't really have a big runtime. And the Super Mario Super Show being the launching point for the 3 of them, okay, was kind of like, you know, probably one of the reasons why it had such a strong downfall. Now, The Legend of Zelda, being as generic and vague as it was exactly, you know, the same premise as the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, except the live action. So they had to try to cram as much as they could into an actual amount of runtime that they would show, and, you know, it didn't run for very long, it didn't last very long, and the popularity went, and then that was the end of it. And to round out the episode today, I kind of wanted to talk about what essentially is the culmination of all of that. Now, as a fan back in the day, like, what would have been the coolest thing in the world but to be like sucked into your video game and, you know, be able to play your favorite video game with your favorite video game friends and, you know, whatever, and do that and blah, 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 blah. Well, they thought, that would be a great thing to do for a cartoon. Sure enough, Captain N was released, you know, like that video game cartoon crossover was the first of its kind, and the, you know, kind of like the last, to be honest. I mean, there was a lot of different things that followed in that, I guess, that pattern, you know, of like real guy in a fictional world thing, and then, you know, it got used as like story base for a lot of different shows after that, but it was kind of bad. I mean, the animation was bad. They tried multiple different, they had multiple seasons of this show, okay? This was like the baby of the project, you know, developers that were making these last 2 shows. Okay, so Captain N was supposed to be huge, but due to like budget restraints and a bunch of other stuff, they literally ended up having a very blocky, generic animated show that lost so much interest from the fan base that by the end of like the last season, nobody cared. Nobody watched it. The animation was poor. The sound animation, the voice acting was bad. The situation was just awful. Now, in perspective, it stars a teenage kid, okay? Little kid named Kenneth and his dog get sucked into Videoland. Videoland is home to like Kid Icarus and Donkey Kong and all those different video game characters. None of the ones that had like licensing problems like Mario and Zelda, which had nothing, you know, Link and Mario were nowhere to be seen in the show. But they still wrapped in that premise. And I mean, like, different video game villains and stuff. Like, there was, like, was it, like, Mother Brain was the big one? Or Doug, I think? Yeah, Doug. And then, you know, like, King Hippo from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! And all those other different games. Like, there was different video villains. And again, it ran with the exact same premise. Bad guys did bad stuff. Good guys had like 2 or 3 tools that they could use to save the day. You know, he got sucked into a video game world, so he had like a belt that had like a Nintendo controller and a zapper that he could use to fight with. So like he had like a couple of tools at his disposal, and like his dog would help, and he had heroes to help him too, and they always kind of like used the power of friendship to save the day. But at the end of it, it was the exact same thing. All of these different cartoons, all of these different franchises had some kind of niche that kept them gaining, you know, attention, had influence on their, you know, fan base. But these cartoons, because they were roping onto the attention of video games and trying to create from that, it just literally had nowhere else to go and spiraled out and then fizzled out and then nobody cared anymore. None of these cartoons ran longer than a few months. Or like longer than like a year at the most. Like, they were all between, like, well, I think, okay, Captain N was probably the longest running show out of the 3 because of the fact they were all released around the same time, and it was the one that they wanted to get the most attention because these other shows were essentially, you know, dropping in popularity, and they were like, we got to keep something for the kids to enjoy, because what do the kids like? The kids like video games. What would you like to be as a kid in a video game? Let's make that happen. And it turns out, no. No, they didn't really like it that much. Can you think of some weird cartoon video game like trope that you noticed when you were a kid that was really weird? You know, like a item or something, you know, like you were a huge fan of, I don't know, G.I. Joe, and they had like a G.I. Joe thermos that didn't make sense to you, or like, do you remember like the Star Wars and the Star Trek toys? If you ever look that up, that'll really make you giggle, because people were just slapping Star Wars on everything they could and Star Trek on everything they could. And it was just like, you know, Astro, Space Blaster, and helmet with like the Star Wars logo on it. And you're like, I don't remember that from the movie at all. But like, is there anything that you remember that was just too weird of a toy or too weird of a show for you to get interested in? Or like just a really bad one? That's the question I want to ask. Do you remember like an absolutely horrible show that no one wants to talk about anymore because no one wants to admit that it existed? That's what the comments are for, y'all. Let me know in the comments below, because if we can talk about it together, I will bring it up in the next one. Any cool shows you can think about, let me know. Otherwise, my name is Nobody. Happy Saturday. I love your face. Like, share, and subscribe, because I will see you next time.
You got it! It's the Mario! Do the Mario! Swing your arms from side to side. Come on, it's time to go. Do the Mario. Take one step, and then again, let's do the Mario all together now. Come on now, just like that.